Joining us now, Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York. She's the author of the new children's book out today entitled Bold and Brave, 10 Heroes Who Won Women the Right to Vote. And welcome back to the show. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
So let's talk about the book. The timing is amazing.
Yeah.
With all the women who chose to run and all the women who won.
Yeah.
And you bring us back to a time where we didn't even have the voice to vote. Talk about the inspiration of the book, if you could.
So this is a book about 10 extraordinary women who did very brave things when they were young to make sure that women had a voice in our government, to make sure women had the right to vote. And each story is about bravery, about courage, about doing something that was very hard to do at the time, but persevering, never giving up. And it's very much relevant for today, especially with the focus on voting rights and how important our precious rights are. And that's why we should be protecting voting rights and making sure that every vote counts.
Well, and also, given this presidency, I think some women may be concerned that the president has misogynistic attitudes toward women. Talk a little, if you could, about how you have seen through the past 2 years. The president has attacked you publicly many times over. And do you think we've made a step forward, or have there been steps back in light of President Trump?
Well, I don't think President Trump values women. I think it was clear on the campaign trail. I think it's clear since he's been president, his attacks on women, his attacks on women of color journalists most recently, is really shocking. And so I think for America's women, they were fed up. They really took this moment, this election, as a moment to be heard. And that's why we saw so many women turning out to the polls, so many women protesting, marching, being heard in every way they possibly can, and women running. And to have over 120 women coming to Congress this year is extraordinary. And then to have 2 new women coming to the Senate. Kyrsten Sinema is one of my dear friends, and I'm so excited that she's just won. We have a lot to be grateful for, and a lot of it has to do with how many women turned out to vote and had the courage to actually run.
So you talk about women who were fed up and decided to run. How do you feel? Are you fed up? And are you deciding to run in 2020? Is this something that is in the realm of possibility for you? And do you think it's time for someone just like you to step up and run?
Well, for me, I think it's a moral question, Mika. I think, I really believe that each one of us has to ask ourselves, what can you do to push against this horribleness that President Trump has put into the world? As I traveled New York, as I traveled the country, the hate, the divisiveness, the anxiety that he's created, it really has called me to fight as hard as I possibly can to restore that moral compass, that truth of who we are as Americans. Because the truth is, we've always cared about one another. We've always had this empathy for one another. We've always believed in the golden rule, and we should care about other people's kids as much as we care about our own. And so I just, I will give it strong consideration about whether that is something that I should do. But I think each one of us has to decide what will we do at this time to fight back as hard as we can, because what President Trump has done to this country is destroying the fabric of who we are.
Senator, you said
Willie, she's not ruling it out.
No, I think that's fair to say. She's, again, not ruling it out. You said a little under a year ago, when this group of women came out and accused the President of the United States of sexual assault, that he needed to resign.
Yeah.
Do you stand by that? Do you still believe he should resign?
Yes, he's got over a dozen credible allegations of sexual assault and harassment. But then you can add to that everything else. I mean, this president has, again, torn at the fabric of who we are as this country. And I think he is being held accountable right now by the electorate. The fact that all these voters have been marching and protesting since he was elected and then took it to the ballot box in 2018. That's why 2018 was such an important election for all of us. It was a wake-up call for America to fight for what you believe in and to restore our democracy to its foundings, that our voices and our votes actually matter.
So the second part of what you said was he should resign, but if he doesn't, we will hold him accountable.
Yes.
And now the House of Representatives has the power to do something about that and to hold him accountable. So in your eyes, what does that mean exactly? as a practical matter? How does the House hold him accountable? For example, impeachment proceedings, or what else if not that?
Well, first of all, we need to protect the Mueller investigation.
Yep.
The most important thing that the Senate can do is pass our bipartisan bill that will actually preserve the investigation, make sure documents can't be destroyed, make sure if he is being fired, it's fired for cause, and let a judge review that. And if it's not for cause, have that judge, Mueller be restored. That's first for our work. And then in the House, they can do their oversight. We've heard from at least 3 or 4 committee chairmen that they plan to do oversight and accountability on a whole host of concerns, whether it's the self-dealing and self-lining of pockets of the administration, of cabinet members, whether it's voter fraud, whether it's collusion, whether they're concerned about the remaining allegations with the Russia investigation. Those are all things that many of our House colleagues are looking into. And I think this election was about creating oversight and accountability over this president and what he's done in office.
Well, you're not alone in thinking the president should have resigned. Among Democrats, they thought he should resign, and they also want him held accountable. Nancy Pelosi has been careful not to use the word impeachment. She's not pushing that publicly anyway. Do you think impeachment is a good idea?
Well, I think that's why the Mueller investigation is so important. You can't really get to any of that work that the House would have to do until you have the facts. And what Mueller has been asked to do is develop the facts. He's already done all the indictments on the Russians who did try to interfere with our election. He's done the low-hanging fruit of basic fraud, allegations of some of President Trump's inner circle. And so now the question is, what are the other types of crimes that are related to collusion? Because collusion is a collection of 5 crimes, right. Looking at each one of those crimes separately and whether that took place and whether there's obstruction of justice. So until we have that investigation completed, we're not going to know what the House will then do next.
Your book, The Bold and the Brave, 10 Heroes, Women, Who Won Women the Right to Vote, is out today.
Yes.
We have just seen a record number of women on the ballot running for office, a record number winning office. Do you believe that there is a tangible difference that a woman brings to the campaign, whether it's a local congressional race or a national presidential campaign, that a man doesn't bring to the table?
Well, it's not always that case, but what women often bring to the table is this passion, this heartfelt desire to make a difference, to help people, this empathy, this emotional intelligence, this determination to do whatever it takes to change what's happening in their local government, in their state, or in Washington. And I'll just give you one example. Lucy McBath just won this House seat in the outskirts of Atlanta. She ran because she wanted to end gun violence in this country. She lost her son to gun violence. That was a seat that we didn't win last time, but her passion and her personal story was so compelling that she was able to win that seat despite spending tens of millions of dollars last cycle. So it's the difference between, I think, this the intensity and this authenticity that I think rang true for candidates all across the country. Even let's look at Kyrsten Sinema. She ran on who she is, the sacrifices she made. She grew up and was homeless at times. She, at one time in her life, lived in a gas station. She has always been someone who will fight for her community, and she understands why that social safety net is so important. So each one of these women who showed brilliance in their campaigns really had that personal story about helping others because of what they've been through personally.
Why do you think it's often the case that women have a higher sense of EQ than men do?
It's just the way, I think it's nature and nurture. I think it's a little of both. And I think it's something that propelled a lot of women to really stand in the breach that President Trump has created. We've seen this division and this tearing apart of our country. And so many women said, this is not going to happen in my community. I'm going to stand up. And when President Trump and his Republican allies put out that hate into the world, like look at Danica Rome. You know, when the person who wrote the transgender anti-bathroom law, it was a transgender woman who went and beat him. That's the kind of just determination that these candidates showed over the last 2 years. And so it's inspiring, I have to tell you. Like, I'm very inspired that so many people decide to run, so many women decide to run for governor. I'm still holding my breath for Stacey Abrams. I mean, I think these candidates are pretty extraordinary, and it's the moment of the times, and I do think it was very much wrought by what President Trump has put into the world.
I'm grateful that you're still inspired, Kyrsten. The new children's book out today is Bold and Brave, 10 Heroes Who Won Women the Right to Vote. Senator Kyrsten Gillibrand, thank you very much. Good to have you on.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And still ahead, we'll talk to one of Senator Gillibrand's Democratic colleagues, Senator Debbie Stabenow of Michigan. Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.